September 1944, high above the dense jungles of Borneo. Major Richard Ira Bong gently pressed his twin-boomed P-38 Lightning into a shallow dive. The aircraft's two Allison V-1710 engines producing a combined 3,000 horsepower that hummed through the airframe. Through his bulletproof windscreen, he scanned the sky below with the practiced eye of a predator. Japanese fighters were climbing desperately toward a formation of American B-24 Liberators, completely unaware that one of the deadliest fighter pilots in American history was already positioning himself perfectly above them, ready to strike. What those Japanese pilots couldn't possibly know was that the unassuming farm boy from Poplar, Wisconsin, now tracking them calmly through his gun sight, had already destroyed dozens of enemy aircraft in aerial combat. By the war's end, he would achieve 40 confirmed aerial victories, making him the highest-scoring American fighter ace in United States history, a record that stands unbroken more than 8 decades later. This is the extraordinary story of how a mild-mannered young man from rural northern Wisconsin became America's deadliest fighter pilot. How a pilot who faced disciplinary problems early in training transformed into a precision instrument of aerial warfare. And how the combination of natural talent, relentless training, and one of the most lethal fighter aircraft ever designed created a legend in the Pacific theater. The farm boy who dreamed of flying. Richard Ira Bong was born on September 24, 1920, in Superior, Wisconsin, the first of 9 children born to Carl Bong, a Swedish immigrant who had come to America as a young boy, and Dora Bryce, an American woman of Scottish-English descent. The Bong family embodied the American dream. Carl had emigrated from Sweden and built a modest but successful life farming the rich soils near the village of Poplar in northern Wisconsin. Growing up on the family farm, young Dicker's friends and family called him learned to operate farm machinery at an early age, a skill that would later prove invaluable when he transitioned to flying complex aircraft. Like all farm children of his era, he had daily chores to perform, responsibilities that instilled in him discipline and a strong work ethic. He hunted and fished in the surrounding woods and streams, developing the keen eyesight and patience that would later make him a deadly marksman in aerial combat. He also played clarinet in his high school marching band and participated in baseball, basketball, and hockey, demonstrating the coordination and reflexes that would serve him well in dogfights thousands of feet above the Pacific. But what truly captured young Bong's imagination were the aircraft that flew overhead. During the summer of 1928, President Calvin Coolidge established his Summer White House in nearby Superior, Wisconsin, to enjoy fishing along the pristine Brule River. To maintain governmental operations, mail was flown in by military aircraft, and these planes flew directly over the Bong family farm. Years later, Bong recalled, "The president's mail plane flew right over my house. I knew then I wanted to be a pilot." The young boy would stop his work in the fields to watch these aircraft pass overhead, mesmerized by their grace and power. He became an avid model airplane builder, meticulously constructing scale replicas that he would fly over the farm fields. After graduating 10th in his high school class of 428 students in 1938, Bong enrolled at Superior State Teachers College, now the University of Wisconsin-Superior, initially planning to become an engineer. However, his passion for aviation remained undimmed. While studying, he enrolled in the Civilian Pilot Training Program, a federally funded initiative designed to create a reserve of trained pilots as war clouds gathered over Europe. On his 20th birthday, September 24, 1940, Bong soloed for the first time, an experience that solidified his determination to make flying his career. From student to sky warrior. As the international situation deteriorated and America's entry into World War II appeared increasingly inevitable, Bong made a momentous decision. On May 29, 1941, more than 6 months before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps Aviation Cadet Program. The young farm boy was about to embark on a journey that would transform him into one of the most lethal combat pilots in American history. Bong completed his basic flight training at various locations, including the Rankin Aeronautical Academy near Tulare, California, and Gardner Field near Taft, California. For his advanced training and gunnery instruction, he was sent to Luke Field near Phoenix, Arizona. There, fate intervened in the form of his gunnery instructor, Captain Barry Goldwater, who would later become a United States Senator and the 1964 Republican presidential nominee. Goldwater, himself a skilled and exacting instructor, later recalled that Bong was a very bright student who was already showing his talent as a pilot. In January 1942, just weeks after Pearl Harbor thrust America into the war, Second Lieutenant Richard Bong was commissioned and awarded his pilot wings. But his natural talent with aircraft soon got him into serious trouble that paradoxically would lead him to the commander who would shape his destiny, the incident that nearly ended his career. In May 1942, Bong received his first operational assignment to the 49th Fighter Squadron, 14th Fighter Group at Hamilton Field, California, where he would transition to the revolutionary Lockheed P-38 Lightning. The P-38 was unlike any aircraft Bong had flown before. With its distinctive twin-boom design, twin engines, and nose-mounted armament, it represented the cutting edge of American aviation technology. The young lieutenant was immediately smitten with the powerful fighter. On June 12, 1942, a good friend of Bong's was getting married. To help celebrate, Bong decided to perform an impromptu air show. He took his P-38 down to rooftop height and flew directly over the newlyweds' home in San Anselmo. Then, seeking to push his luck further, he roared down Market Street in San Francisco at such a low altitude that his prop wash blew clothing off a woman's clothesline in Oakland. According to some accounts, he and other pilots also looped their P-38s around the center span of the Golden Gate Bridge, though Bong later denied his involvement in that particular stunt. The woman whose laundry was scattered across her yard complained to the base, and the incident came to the attention of Major General George C. Kenney, commanding officer of the 4th Air Force. Kenney was not amused. He called the young second lieutenant into his office for what Bong surely expected to be a career-ending confrontation. "Lieutenant Bong," Kenney ordered sternly, "Monday morning, you check this address out in Oakland, and if the woman has any washing to be hung out on the line, you do it for her. Then, when the clothes are dry, take them off the line and bring them into the house. And don't drop any of them on the ground, or you will have to wash them all over again. I want this woman to think we are good for something else besides annoying people. Now get out of here before I change my mind, that's all." But Kenney, one of the most perceptive commanders in the Pacific Theater, saw something in the brash young pilot beyond his reckless behavior. He recognized exceptional aircraft control, remarkable spatial awareness, and reflexes that operated with extraordinary speed. After Bong left his office, Kenney later wrote, "If you didn't want to fly down Market Street, I wouldn't have you in my Air Force. But you are not to do it anymore, and I mean what I say." So he added prophetically, "We needed kids like this lad." When Kenney was promoted to command the Allied Air Forces and 5th Air Force in General Douglas MacArthur's Southwest Pacific area in July 1942, he specifically requested that Bong be assigned to his command. It would prove to be one of the most consequential personnel decisions of the Pacific Air War. Into the Cauldron, first combat over New Guinea. Bong was still grounded when his original squadron shipped out to England in July 1942. He was reassigned to the 84th Fighter Squadron, 78th Fighter Group, which was soon deployed to Australia. By September 1942, Bong had been assigned to the 9th Fighter Squadron, 49th Fighter Group, deploying to New Guinea as part of General Kenny's 5th Air Force. The young pilot arrived in the Southwest Pacific with limited combat experience, carrying only his training hours and natural ability. His opponents, by stark contrast, had been fighting continuously since 1937, with thousands of combat hours accumulated in brutal campaigns across China, the Philippines, and throughout the Pacific. The Imperial Japanese Navy's elite fighter pilots flew the legendary Mitsubishi A6M-0, an aircraft renowned for its extraordinary maneuverability and the skill of its veteran pilots. On paper, the odds heavily favoured the Japanese. The 9th Fighter Squadron was temporarily short of aircraft, so in November 1942, while the squadron waited for delivery of their P-38s, Bong and several other pilots were temporarily reassigned to fly missions with the 39th Fighter Squadron, 35th Fighter Group, based at Port Moresby, New Guinea. It was with this unit that Lieutenant Bong would see his first combat and claim his first victories. December 27, 1942. Above Buna, New Guinea, during the brutal Battle of Bunagona. 12 P-38 Lightnings from the 39th Squadron, including Bong flying wing position, climbed to intercept a large formation of Japanese bombers escorted by Zero fighters. Leading the American formation was Captain Thomas J. Lynch, already an experienced combat pilot who would later become an ace himself and one of Bong's closest friends. As the formations merged, Bong got his first real look at Japanese aircraft in combat. Mitsubishi G4M bombers, protected by the highly maneuverable A6M-0s that could turn inside virtually any Allied fighter at lower speeds. Japanese pilots, masters of low-speed dogfighting, could exploit this advantage ruthlessly. American pilots who tried to turn with Zeros often died quickly, but Bong didn't try to turn. In that first engagement, following Lynch's example and his own instincts, Bong used the P-38's advantages: speed, altitude, and devastating firepower. He destroyed a Mitsubishi A6M-0 and a Nakajima Ki-43 Oscar fighter. For this action, he was awarded the Silver Star. More importantly, he learned the fundamental lesson that would guide his entire combat career. Never turn with a zero-use speed, altitude, and firepower instead. Mastering the Lightning, aircraft and tactics, the Lockheed P-38. Lightning that Richard Bong would fly throughout his combat career was one of the most distinctive and revolutionary fighter aircraft of World War II. Designed by Lockheed's legendary engineers Hall Hibbard and Clarence Kelly Johnson in response to a 1937 U.S. Army requirement for a high-altitude, high-speed interceptor, the Lightning's twin-boom design was unlike anything the Japanese had encountered. Two Allison V1710 liquid-cooled engines, each producing more than 1,400 horsepower, were mounted in streamlined booms connected by a short wing center section to a central nacelle that contained the pilot and armament. The engines turned counter-rotating propellers, completely eliminating the torque effect that caused single-engine fighters to pull to one side during takeoff and flight, a revolutionary innovation. Turbo superchargers positioned behind each engine gave the P-38 exceptional performance at high altitudes, where many Japanese fighters struggled. With a top speed exceeding 400 mph and a service ceiling above 40,000 feet, the Lightning could outrun and outclimb most Japanese aircraft. Its operational range, especially when fitted with external drop tanks, exceeded 2,200 miles. Far greater than any Japanese fighter, giving American planners unprecedented flexibility in targeting previously untouchable enemy bases. But perhaps the P-38's most lethal characteristic was its concentrated nose-mounted armament. Unlike most fighters of the era, which mounted guns in the wings where convergence patterns limited effective range, the Lightning mounted all its weapons in the nose. 4 50-caliber M2 Browning machine guns with 500 rounds each, and one Hispano 20mm autocannon with 150 rounds. All 5 weapons fired together, creating a concentrated cone of destruction. When enemy aircraft entered this convergence zone, typically between 300 and 400 yards, the results were often catastrophic. Bong quickly learned to exploit these advantages systematically. His combat reports, characteristically understated, noted altitude, engagement conditions, and outcomes with minimal embellishment. But what became clear during his early missions was his rapidly developing understanding of how to fight effectively in the P-38. Don't turn. Don't try to dogfight. Use speed, altitude, and firepower. Position carefully. Fire precisely. Disengage immediately. The art of deflection shooting. What truly separated Richard Bong from average pilots, and even from many good pilots, was his mastery of deflection shooting, the most difficult gunnery skill in aerial combat. Deflection shooting requires a pilot to calculate where a moving target will be when bullets arrive, not where it is when fired, compensating for the target's speed, direction, altitude change, and the ballistic characteristics of the weapons. Most pilots struggled with these complex three-dimensional calculations under the stress of combat. Many fired long, inaccurate bursts, hoping volume would compensate for precision. Bong's ability to make these adjustments instinctively, smoothly moving his controls to place his concentrated firepower exactly where his target would be, set him apart. Major Thomas Lynch, Bong's squadron mate and fellow ace, described Bong's technique as remarkably patient and precise. Bong would position himself carefully, sometimes maneuvering extensively for advantage, then close to effective range and fire-controlled bursts, Lynch observed. His ammunition efficiency was notably superior to average pilot performance. While many pilots expended thousands of rounds for each confirmed kill, Bong's short, accurate bursts meant his ammunition lasted longer and killed more effectively. Captain Barry Goldwater, who had instructed Bong in gunnery at Luke Field, had recognized this natural talent early. During training, Bong had demonstrated his skill in an informal hassle high above the Arizona desert. Flying a much slower AT-6 trainer, Bong squared off against a Czech pilot in a P-38 Lightning. The dogfight should have been a mismatch. The P-38 was far faster and more agile than the AT-6, and the Czech pilot had hundreds more hours of flight experience. But no matter how the P-38 pilot maneuvered, he couldn't keep Bong off his tail. Within seconds of each engagement, Bong would be closing in on the P-38 from behind, his gun sight tracking the faster aircraft with uncanny precision. This combination of patience, spatial awareness, and deadly accuracy became Bong's signature. He considered his gunnery skills to be merely adequate, so he compensated by getting as close as possible to his targets before firing, sometimes so close that he flew through the debris of exploding enemy aircraft, and on one occasion actually colliding with his target. But analysis of his gun camera footage by Army Air Forces experts showed his hit percentage was extraordinarily high compared to average fighter pilots. The ace emerges, building the record. On January 7, 1943, Bong shot down 2 more Japanese fighters during attacks on a convoy attempting to reinforce Lae, New Guinea. The next day, he downed another aircraft over Lae Harbour, becoming an ace pilot with 5 confirmed aerial victories and earning his first Distinguished Flying Cross. In March 1943, when the 9th Fighter Squadron finally received their P-38 Lightnings, Bong rejoined them at Schwimmer Field, also known as 14-Mile Drome, near Port Moresby. His victory count climbed steadily through the spring and summer of 1943. On July 26, 1943, Bong shot down 4 Japanese fighters over Leh in a single mission, a remarkable feat that earned him the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. He was promoted to captain in August. The July 26th engagement demonstrated Bong's evolving tactical sophistication. Instead of diving immediately into the fight, he positioned his flight with altitude advantage and waited for gaps in the defensive coverage, identifying moments when enemy bombers were exposed. Then he struck, diving from altitude at high speed before Japanese defenders could react effectively. He engaged the bombers with his concentrated nose-mounted firepower. The combined output of 4 50-caliber machine guns and 1 20-meter cannon could destroy aircraft rapidly when accurately aimed. After each attack pass, Bong would use his excess speed to climb back to altitude for another engagement, maintaining the energy advantage that Japanese fighters with their superior low-speed maneuverability couldn't match. Multiple kills and single missions became increasingly common for him, yet his ammunition expenditure per kill remained notably low compared to average pilot performance. In March 1943, the P-38 played a crucial role in one of the war's most decisive air-sea battles, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. When Japanese convoys attempted to reinforce Leh, Allied aircraft launched devastating attacks. 28 P-38 Lightnings, including pilots trained in tactics similar to those Bong employed, provided fighter cover for the strike force. In combat with Japanese Zeros attempting to protect the convoy, the Lightning pilots claimed 20 kills while losing only 3 P-38s. The battle demonstrated the effectiveness of the tactics that Bong and other skilled P-38 pilots had developed, maintaining altitude advantage, using speed for engagement and disengagement, and exploiting the Lightning's concentrated firepower. By November 1943, Bong had 21 confirmed victories, making him one of America's top aces. General Kenny personally decorated Bong with additional awards and sent him back to the United States for a war bond tour and well-deserved leave. The American public, hungry for heroes in the dark days of 1943, embraced the young pilot. But Bong, uncomfortable with publicity and eager to return to his squadron mates, requested to return to combat. While on leave in Superior, Wisconsin, in November 1943, Bong attended a homecoming event at his alma mater, Superior State Teachers College. As the previous year's homecoming king, he was invited to crown the new homecoming king. The previous year's homecoming queen, Marjorie Vattendahl, a tall, dark-haired beauty from Grand Forks, North Dakota, who was teaching art at the college, joined him on stage. They had their first date a few days later, and Bong was smitten. Breaking records, the race to Rickenbacker's mark. When Bong returned to New Guinea in February 1944, he carried with him a photograph of Marjorie Vattendahl. He named his P-38J Lightning Marge and glued an enlargement of her college graduation photo to the nose of his aircraft. Soon, newspapers across America were running stories about the ace whose plane bore his sweetheart's picture. Marjorie Vattendahl found herself pursued by newsreel cameras, and Bong's P-38, Marge, became one of the most famous aircraft in the Pacific. For his second combat tour, Bong was given more freedom to choose his missions and served in a training role while continuing to fly combat. The Japanese Air Forces, struggling to replace massive losses from years of attrition warfare, now fielded many pilots with far less training than their earlier elite cadres. The experience gap had become significant, and American pilots like Bong, with extensive flight time and thorough gunnery training, held distinct advantages. On April 12, 1944, during missions over Hollandia, New Guinea, Captain Bong shot down his 26th and 27th enemy aircraft. With these victories, he surpassed the American record of 26 aerial victories set by Captain Eddie Rickenbacker during World War I record that had stood for more than a quarter century. Bong was promoted to Major by General Kenny and dispatched to the United States for another Bond tour. The publicity surrounding his record-breaking achievement made Bong a national celebrity. After visiting training bases and completing a 15-state Bond promotion tour, he returned to New Guinea in September 1944. General Kenny, increasingly concerned about risking his star pilot, assigned Bong to the V Fighter Command Staff as an advanced gunnery instructor with permission to fly missions, but explicit orders not to seek combat unnecessarily. It was a restriction that Bong, eager to continue fighting, found frustrating. The final missions, 40 victories and the Medal of Honor. Despite the restrictions, Bong continued flying combat missions during the Philippines campaign, operating from Tacloban on Leyte. Flying priority missions often meant facing capable enemy pilots and defeating them. His tactical approaches continued to evolve, emphasizing positioning formations with sun advantage and altitude superiority. Then timing attacks when enemy fighters were focused on bomber targets. In October 1944, during large-scale Japanese counterattacks against American bombers striking oil refineries at Balikpapan, Borneo, Bong led P-38 formations in intense combat. During one engagement, his aircraft sustained significant combat damage, including hits to one engine. Most pilots would have disengaged immediately and headed for home. Instead, Bong feathered the damaged engine, activated fire suppression systems, and continued engaging enemy aircraft on single-engine power. The P-38, designed with redundancy, could fly and fight on one engine, though performance was significantly degraded. Despite the damage, Bong scored additional kills before returning to base on compromised systems. Ground crews later assessed extensive damage to his aircraft. By December 17, 1944, flying over San Jose on the island of Mindoro in the Philippines, Major Richard Bong shot down a Nakajima Ki-43 Hayabusa, Allied reporting name Oscar, fighter. It was his 40th confirmed aerial victory. He had flown a total of 200 combat missions. General Kenny, under orders from General Douglas MacArthur himself, permanently grounded America's top ace. Bong was too valuable as a symbol, trainer, and source of morale to risk in further combat. 5 days earlier, on December 12, 1944, during a ceremony at an American airfield on Leyte, General Douglas MacArthur personally presented Major Bong with the Medal of Honor, America's highest award for military valor. An Associated Press reporter recorded the general's words, "Of all military attributes, that one which arouses the greatest admiration is courage. It is the basis of all successful military ventures. Our forces possess it to a high degree, and various awards are provided to show the public's appreciation. The Congress of the United States has reserved to itself the honor of decorating those amongst all who stand out as the bravest of the brave. It's this high and noble category, Bong, that you now enter as I pin upon your tunic the Medal of Honor. Wear it as a symbol of the invincible courage you have displayed so often in mortal combat. My dear boy, may a merciful God continue to protect you, is the constant prayer of your Commander-in-Chief." The following day, Douglas MacArthur himself would be promoted to General of the Army, becoming one of only 9 American military officers ever to hold 5-star rank. Legacy and tragic end. Richard Bong's final combat mission was December 17, 1944, a patrol that resulted in no enemy contact. He returned to the United States in January 1945 as America's highest-scoring fighter ace, recipient of the Medal of Honor, and a genuine national hero. On February 10, 1945, in a ceremony attended by 1,200 guests and covered by international press, Major Richard Bong married Marjorie Vattendahl at Concordia Lutheran Church in Superior, Wisconsin. The newlyweds moved to Burbank, California, where Bong had been assigned as a test pilot for Lockheed Aircraft Corporation, helping to evaluate the revolutionary new P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter. But tragedy struck swiftly. On August 6, 1945, the same day that the United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, Japan Major Richard Bong took off from Lockheed Air Terminal in Burbank for an acceptance test flight of P-80A Shooting Star serial number 44-85048. It was his 12th flight in the jet. He had accumulated just 4 hours and 15 minutes of flight time in the revolutionary aircraft. Shortly after takeoff, at approximately 2:45 p.m., the aircraft's primary fuel pump malfunctioned. Bong either forgot to switch to the auxiliary fuel pump or was unable to do so. The engine failed from fuel starvation. At low altitude with insufficient time to restart or reach the runway, Bong attempted to bail out. The P-80 rolled inverted and Bong ejected, but he was too low for his parachute to open before he struck the ground. The jet crashed into a narrow field at the intersection of Oxnard Street and Satsuma Avenue in North Hollywood, California. Major Richard Ira Bong, America's ace of aces, was killed instantly. He was 24 years old. The news of his death shared front-page headlines across America with reports of the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. General George C. Kenney later recalled, "I stopped thinking of the atom bomb which had wiped out Hiroshima that morning, stopped speculation about the effect of the coming entry of Russia into the Pacific War, even stopped thinking of the capitulation of Japan. We had lost a loved one, someone we had been glad to see out of combat, and on his way home 8 months before. Major Richard the Bong of Poplar was dead." Marjorie Bong, then 21 years old, learned of her husband's death while listening to the radio at their Burbank apartment. "It was such a traumatic experience for her," recalled Christabel Grant, executive director of the Richard the Bong World War II Heritage Center. "It was something she had a very difficult time talking about, even as an elderly woman in her 70s. Marjorie eventually remarried twice and had 2 daughters. But she rarely spoke of her brief marriage to Dick Bong until decades later. She devoted her later years to building the Richard the Bong Veterans Historical Center in Superior, Wisconsin, which opened to honor not only her first husband, but all World War II veterans. She passed away on September 27, 2003, at age 79, and was buried next to Richard Bong in Poplar Cemetery. The measure of greatness. The statistics of Richard Bong's combat career tell only part of his remarkable story. 40 confirmed aerial victories, 8 probably destroyed, 7 damaged, 200 combat missions flown, 0 losses among the bomber crews he protected during countless escort missions. But the real measure of Bong's impact extends far beyond these numbers. His tactical innovations maintaining altitude advantage, using speed to strike, firing only when certain, exploiting the P-38's strengths while avoiding its weaknesses, became standard doctrine for American fighter pilots throughout the Pacific. His gunnery techniques were incorporated into training manuals. New pilots studied his gun camera footage and combat reports, learning how precision and patience could win battles that brute aggression could not. Japanese pilots who survived the war and were later interviewed described encountering highly skilled American pilots who used altitude, speed, and concentrated firepower with devastating effectiveness. They acknowledged facing opponents whose precision and tactical discipline were extremely difficult to counter. While they did not know Bong's name at the time, they recognized the tactics he had pioneered and exemplified. 80 years later, Richard Bong's record of 40 confirmed victories remains unbroken and likely will stand forever. Modern air combat, dominated by beyond visual range missiles and radar-guided weapons, will never again produce the close-range dogfighting that characterized World War II aerial combat. The young pilot who faced disciplinary issues early in his career became a legend by mastering fundamentals: patience, precision, and effective deflection shooting. He didn't rely on aggression or recklessness. He relied on calculated positioning and flawless execution. Every engagement reflected careful planning. Every kill resulted from proper positioning and accurate fire. At the Richard I Bong Veterans Historical Center in Superior, Wisconsin, visitors can see his Medal of Honor, his flight logs documenting 200 combat missions, displays honoring his service, and a restored P-38 painted with Marge nose art, representing his wartime aircraft. The center also honors all World War II veterans, reflecting Marjorie Bong Drucker's wish that the facility commemorate not just her husband's achievements, but the contributions of all who served. The battlefields where Bong earned his 40 victories are now peaceful. The jungles of New Guinea, the skies over Borneo and the Philippines, these places where he fought with such skill and courage, are quiet now. The wrecks of Japanese fighters have long since deteriorated into tropical soil. But the record remains, an enduring testament to an extraordinary pilot. The young man from Wisconsin who became America's deadliest fighter pilot. The ace of aces who turned precision and discipline into highly effective combat performance. The pilot who proved that in aerial combat, superior technique and consistent execution produce exceptional results. 40 confirmed victories. Survival through 200 combat missions. Complete success in air-to-air engagements. The numbers tell the story. The record speaks for itself. And nearly 8 decades later, no American pilot has surpassed what Richard Ira Bong accomplished in the skies above the Pacific. Exceptional precision in aerial warfare delivered through careful positioning and accurate fire from the most successful American fighter ace in history.